Welcome to the second edition of SPAG Dialogue's Women's Series, A Room Full of Women, this time in collaboration with Empower, our House of Employee Engagement and Employer Branding at SPAG. At the onset, our thoughts with everybody in India where the pandemic has led to deep distress. Thank you everybody who has joined us from there and taken out the time to be a part of this very important discussion. SPAG Dialogue started in April 2020 with the idea of starting conversations, building thought leadership, and spreading awareness. A room full of women is an extension of that very idea, where we want to essentially be conversation starters about issues that are prevalent but not always talked about. The first step to change is conversation, and we're here to start one. I'll now pass this over to our Empower House of Employee Engagement and Employer Branding lead from Singapore, Vagmita Sharma, to introduce our panel and kickstart the session.
Thank you so much, Ignore, for setting the tone and the context for this discussion. A very warm welcome to all of you to this brand new session of SPAG Dialogue. Well, diversity and inclusion has been a topic of discussion in the last year in 2020. It has impacted all parts of our lives, whether it was professional, personal, or social. It has not left any aspect untouched, even the political national agendas, and of course the workplaces. This reminds me of a very famous quote by Captain Donald Williams, the NASA astronaut, who once said, "For those who have seen the Earth from space, and for the hundreds and perhaps thousands more who will, the experience most certainly changes your perspective. The things that we share in our world are far more valuable than those which divide us." Traveling this road of driving diversity and inclusion in the region, we have with us today Eugene Lam, Senior Human Resources Director for Asia Pacific with Danaher Corporation, Neena Bhaskar, the Talent Acquisition Leader and Diversity and Inclusion Advocate at Becton Dickinson Greater Asia, Roshni Das, the Head of Rewards and Talent Management at Marico India, Surya Rai, HR Director for ASEAN with Reckitt. A warm welcome to this power-packed panel of speakers. Today we have gathered to focus on one eminent aspect of diversity and inclusion, which has not left any organization untouched: the Gen Z and the millennials. Roshni and Neena, you both represent organizations which are very diverse in their generation mix. And I would like to begin this discussion with you two, and I would like to hear from you. Apart from the diversity and inclusion policies, what is your idea and your organization's idea about diversity and inclusion and to drive it across the region? You can start with Roshni.
Sure, Vagmita. Thanks for the opportunity. Very warm welcome to everybody who's joined this session. So coming to diversity and inclusion at Marico, like Vagmita, you've rightly mentioned, we have quite a focused approach. We have strongly identified areas of in diversity that we want to focus on. This like around gender, differently abled or persons with disability, with clearly identified pillars, which are around, for example, leadership commitment, diversity sensitization, enabling infrastructure policies, the strong governance mechanisms or talent management practices to ensure that the integrated diversity is definitely a success. Apart from that, we obviously have a strong 3-year to 5-year targets roadmap that is attached to it. And all of this we've created as a co-creation with our members through because we believe to be a listening organization through strong employee surveys, through feedbacks, through focus group discussions, and crafted this journey. And I think we can speak as we discuss more. I think over to Nina to share her views.
Thank you, Roshni, and hi everyone. Good afternoon. At BD we call it inclusion and diversity, and not D&I. We call it the other way around because we believe that before we talk about bringing in diverse talent, let's talk about inclusivity within the organization. So we believe that the employees should have the opportunity to have a say, be heard, be valued for who they are and what they are in the organization, more than just doing their work. So, today, if you look at inclusion and diversity, it's not a choice anymore. If organizations have to thrive, they have to survive, it becomes a part of your culture. It is not a trend, and it is not just an independent agenda on the table. So talking about BD, we clearly recognize that our success lies in diverse talents, being an inclusive organization, and that starts from the beginning when we are looking to hire somebody into the organization till the end, somebody's there with the organization. So we look at diverse recruitment processes that starts from, having a very diverse interview panel, to having gender decoder tools being used during those interviews. And every organization has a diverse late target. But with us, what we do is we just don't keep it as a target, but we review those metrics, report those monthly, and have meaningful conversations with hiring managers and key stakeholders to see what we've been doing well, what can we do to improve, and what are the gaps that are there. So we don't leave it for quarterly reviews, but we do it as a monthly conversation. In fact, even during the recruitment process, we make sure the process remains inclusive by ensuring that we equip people managers, hiring managers with enough training programs where they understand how can they remove the unconscious biases, how can they leverage on technology which can help them to overlook those biases. And something that I find very interesting is blind CV reviews, where you're actually measuring performance more than potential, because you are free from the biases of age and gender and all that. So you're not looking at potential per se, you're looking at performance based on what that person has presented in the resume. So those are the things we do, which is why I feel when you said, beyond policy, it certainly is. It's a way of living for us at BD.
That's wonderful. I mean, Roshni, you mentioned about being in a listening organization, and Anina, you brought forth the very interesting aspect about bringing inclusion before diversity. I know, as a matter of fact, that FMCG industry is heavily driven by the millennials and the younger generations entering the workforce every day, and I would be very curious to hear from Surya. Because he's had so much experience. And Surya, would you like to tell us a little more about as to how does your organization and you as a leader look at diversity and inclusion?
So thank you, Agnita, for the opportunity. And I again warmly welcome all the participants and my colleagues here on the panel. I really liked how my co-panelists talked about inclusion first and diversity, right? So I think that is really important, right? Where everybody feels included and performing at peak, right? And enabled and empowered. So I think that is really, really important. I think most companies nowadays have a very clear, compelling reason for choosing diversity and inclusion as one of their key organizational choices. So it's, I think, organization agnostic, industry agnostic. And with new generation, it is becoming even more important because they are making very sharp choices around who they want to work for, where they want to work longer, and where they want to give their best, right? And this is from many different angles. Even if you look at our industry, for example, right, with your brand portfolio that you may have as a company, you will have a very diverse set of consumers to appeal to. If it's a baby milk formula, you are talking to a mom who's heavily involved on what their babies get for nutrition, right? Similarly, if you are in today's world, I can talk about a category or a brand like Dettol, where hand hygiene and overall health has become so important. I think the consumers are heavily involved, and this is across generation, across ethnicity, all kinds of diversity that you can think about. Even if you look at beauty industry, for example, or hair industry, consumers are heavily involved on what brand they choose. And therefore, to represent those consumers inside, it's not just a paradigm shift in terms of employment practices, but also to give voice to the consumers whose problems you are there to solve. You have to build that diverse workforce. And I also loved, how one of our co-panelists talked about listening organization, and make sure all those voices are internally represented in solving the challenges, the problems of our consumers. Only then you will have a relevant brand proposition to win in the longer term and sustain your business and growth, whatever you aspire to, right? So I think it has, become even more important for all companies to be able to appeal as an employer of choice to, I think, current and future generation of employees, to offer a workplace where everybody feels included, everybody feels empowered, and with all the flexibility, the autonomy, the empowerment. At Reckitt, we call it freedom to succeed, which I genuinely feel, Reckitt has an edge on, where you can come in and choose how you want to make a contribution, how you want to maximize your contribution to the business, and also your personal growth and development, right? So I think that is at the heart of what you can offer as a company or as an employer. So and there are other aspects of this new generation. For example, sustainability. They are also very concerned about their role that they want to play in saving the planet, right, in future, and therefore how responsible an employer is in that aspect. Or just to give one more example, in terms of changing preferences, when we were perhaps choosing our employer and when we were back in university, this was not as important in those days. But now I think this has become very, very important. Purpose of a company. What do you do with your brands or your products? Are you somebody who is healing people? Are you into offering nutrition? I think those things are also equally important, and it really appeals in attracting, retaining, engaging, the current generation and the future. I think will be equally important or even more. So we will continue to be tested by our employees currently and our future employees as well. I hope that answers and gives you some perspective, Vagmita, on the question
Yes,
you were saying.
definitely, Surya. In fact, it was very insightful. And, just by mere flow of this conversation, we have such a wonderful mix of thoughts coming in because the organizations are at different stages of their journeys with their employees, right? So the strategies and the way they are managing the workforce management is so different. And and we actually have in the panel today somebody who has a very diverse experience of different kinds of industries. So has been with medical technology, technology consultants, and having worked with big brands like Accenture, IBM, and so we have Eugene with us. And Eugene, hello and thank you for joining us today. So I wanted to ask you and understand from you. You've had a very expansive journey of working in different organizations. And if we look deeper in those organizations, all of them, they were catering to a very different mix of generations. Few of them were more towards the Gen X and millennials, and there were others who were, kind of prepping themselves up for inviting the Gen Zs to join in. So, wanted to understand that how, in your experience so far, you've seen organizations evolve or change their strategies to match the generations that they're catering to, the workforce that they are hiring or want to hire.
Yeah, that's always a tough question, I must say. I think most of our companies are either American or European, right? And I think for US companies that I've been with, what's been interesting is obviously in the earlier years, well, at least last 10 years, a lot of the focus was on gender. But as you and I know, that's shifted tremendously, right? At least from an Asia perspective. I've been here a long time, and obviously, I never saw gender, to be honest, as a big topic here because, well, at least in the companies I've been in, we have always been fair, as in, best person for the job. But it's interesting. I think maybe I'll draw the parallel of what I've seen over the years that's kind of worked, and so Singapore is an interesting place, right? Singapore, as you know, it's the talent attraction place. It's got very foreign talent friendly policies. So obviously a lot of foreign direct investments are here. So I see a lot of regional headquarters here. The good news is this, obviously, people like me, who's a local here, right? I get the opportunity to work for multinationals who base themselves here, right? So a lot of APAC headquarters here. So I think one of the trends I've seen in diversity is obviously in geography. And some of you may or may not know Singapore's policy. But our housing policies here are very interesting. I don't know if you know this. The Singapore government mandates that in every estate, you actually have a certain percentage of Chinese, Indians, Malays, right, seats and so on. Now, obviously, the Western world don't look too kindly into Singapore's version of democracy, right? Because we say, no, you need that. But what's been really interesting to me as an observation is, and by the way, when I was young, can you imagine, I used to watch MGR and Sivaji. So obviously I'm Gen X, right? And there is some, I saw from a very young age, right, the power of diversity, even beyond corporations. What it means to walk down my corridor in a lift, to see my Indian neighbors, my Malay neighbors, to be invited to their place for Diwali, for Ramadan, and I was agnostic I was colorblind at a very young age. And I saw the power of diversity because what had happened years later, when we were having terrorism and this kind of crisis that were happening, I must say that Singapore was largely untouched, even though we're so racially mixed. And I would say that was my first lesson in D&I, right? What it means to be a diverse, because unless you sort of understand, right, the dynamics of a society, right, and why it can progress that quickly by embracing differences, when you now look at corporations, right, it's interesting, right, that now that's starting. Well, Singapore started it as a social experiment of sorts, right? But if you look at us as a society, it's amazing, right? So I draw that experience, and I would say that companies like IBM and HP that I was at, I hate saying this, but we sort of metricize a lot of these things. And I want to say that obviously if you have a leader that sort of understands the value of this, it makes a difference. But I think in the earlier years I saw the evolution that unless you metricize it, which is very similar to Singapore's experience, which is unless you do something to measure things. To be honest, the law of nature will take its course, right? People of the same will sort of congregate, right? You hire the same type of people. I mean, that's a fact of life, right? And I saw that since I was a kid, right? But then, so one thing I would say is metricizing it sort of gave me a bad aftertaste. But over the years, I think what had happened in those organizations, they started to then see the value of diversity and inclusion. I like the way Nina was talking about inclusion first, right? We used to say diversity is inviting people to a party, but inclusion is what? Can you dance with me at the party, right? So that's quite different, right? So many organizations, I would say, do a bit of lip service. They got nice metrics about how many female talent you have and all that kind of stuff, which is great. But if you get down to the heart of the matter, right, it's whether you can dance with those people that you invite. I mean, touch my heart. I don't know how many organizations have actually done that successfully. Again, maybe the ones I've been at have succeeded, but not as well as I think. Just given my growing up years here, right, and what I see the power of true inclusion, right. So I would say that there's three dimensions here. You can tell that where I'm hinting at. One clearly is the topic on gender. The second, is generation, which is what this is about. And you can tell where I'm slanting at with this is geography, right? Which I think these are the sort of three Gs that encompass today's topic on diversity, beyond just gender and generation. Yeah, that would be my take on this.
That was a very beautiful thought, Eugene. You actually left with us that you invite somebody at the party and be willing to dance with them. So it's a wonderful way of putting across the thought. And that actually brings, and I'm actually curious, and I'm sure my audiences are as well. We very well are aware, and a few of you pointed it out, that how different generations they have different aspirations. They are at different stages of their life. Gen X is probably kind of looking at more of power and authority, like as if they're trying to reap the fruits of the hard work that they have put into their professional careers. The millennials are the ones who are looking at more of teamwork, and they want to engage more. They're trying to look for a purpose, the reason why they're working. And the Gen Zs, they're like willing to explore. They are the sustainability supporters, the climate change supporters. So we know they have different priorities. Now, from an organization perspective, and Roshni, probably you can throw some light on this part. From an organization's perspective, how does an organization, what would be the right way of managing their professional priorities and marrying it with their expectations that they have?
Sure, Bhagmita. So I'll quickly, kind of give you a sense of a few things that we are trying to do at Marico to be able to, cater to the needs of like the multi-generational workforce with
Sure.
similar or slightly different priorities like you mentioned. So first of all, I think what we've tried to create at Marico is a culture of membership in alignment with our very strong pillar of inclusion, which is a sense of belongingness to the organization. So our employees are not employees. We say that they are our members or Mariconians, as we refer to them. And that itself brings in a sense of trust. It brings in a sense of ownership that the members bring in to the organization. With that, we link it to our talent value proposition, which says that challenging, enriching, and fulfilling careers, which enables our members to realize their full potential. Now, to do that, with this culture of membership in place, what we say that you are free to carve out your own career paths, your own career journeys, and we are there to support you, right? With the right developmental mechanisms, with the IDPs, with whatever, with the right career movements, with projects, exposures that you need to be able to build those career journeys, along with being a very purpose driven and socially responsible organization, right? And that is something that we feel is ingrained in Marico's values and culture, and is something that the millennials or the Gen Y and Gen Z have a very easy relatability to. And that is something that we've really not worked upon, because from the time of inception, Marico has been a value-based, a socially responsible, and a purpose-driven organization. So that is something that works really well for us. Apart from that, a few things that we've consciously invested in are, say, technological tools, which enables a lot more easier collaboration and communication, which again we see is a very huge ask amongst the newer generation of workforce, to put it. So they would look at easy informal connects. They would look at managers being coaches first and managers second, and that is the culture that we are focusing that we enable, and leaders as mentors, so senior leadership being very actively involved in their own development are certain things that we focus on. Apart from few new age policies and practices that I think are very much the need of the hour. So if we say that we are a socially driven organization, we have been conscious and said that we've introduced something like, for example, a social impact leave, or leave that you can take from the organization to just create a social impact. You want to volunteer, you want to kind of do something which is your personal passion, please do it, and we support it. Apart from obviously the member wellness interventions which get driven, which so that you are developing both personally as well as professionally when you're working with Marico.
So this is very interesting. Few things that you mentioned, especially the social impact leave and all. So I mean, I'm just looking at few organizations right now who are very vocal about the fact that we want to work with the new talent, the Gen Z talent, and I also know that and I'm very sure Surya would have a few inputs to share here, because he's a great proponent of policies and procedures which are aligned to the kind of generation that you want to attract for your organization. Surya, would you want to throw some light on this?
So your question is around different generations,
Yes.
the policies and procedures. I think first of all, I will go back to the point that was discussed earlier, whether your leaders are listening, right, and making sure that everybody who comes to work, they feel totally included and they feel like they can perform at peak and there are no barriers. And I think in the current context, at least with the COVID world, flexibility has really become, the reality, right? Earlier, it was a policy that some companies had. Sometimes, companies used to have a practice where if some employee wanted some flexibility to work from a different location, you have to go through a whole lot of employee relation review to approve it or not approve it. But nowadays, this location for short term working remotely, all of that has become a norm, right? So I think the evolution, if anything, has been accelerated, right, with that. And I think this generation requires the flexibility, the autonomy, much more than what we were used to in the past. Also beyond, I think the purpose-driven organization, listening leaders, empowering leaders, the freedom to succeed at work. What is also important is, are you using technology to make the work simpler and better and more enjoyable and fun? Is very important aspect of how you can engage your new generation of workforce as well, right? I mean, we grew up filling in Excel sheets and things like that. Now, they can do things much faster and in a much more reliable way. And the companies have to invest in those tools and technology to make sure that it is in sync with the preference of the new generation, right? The app world is here, and and maybe it will change again to something else that we don't know, right? So to keep pace with that, right, in terms of what platform people are working on, how well are you using technology to connect your people, to help them to collaborate? I think collaboration is the other one that is very, very important to this generation. What I find interestingly different as well is, in our generation, we were happy chasing a certain band level and a ladder as a as a way of defining success. I don't think that is the way many of the young people nowadays think. They are thinking in terms of how they are building skills that are relevant. Are they meaningfully contributing to the company's growth and business? Are they in a business that's helping people solve their life's challenges, versus perhaps doing something that hurts people, right? So-called, purpose. And then, are they using technology to make things simpler and better for everybody around them, right? Are they able to collaborate from wherever? It doesn't have to be a face-to-face collaboration anymore. Um, are there leaders, people who are going to review them, sitting in a room asking tough questions? Or are they having leaders who are going to listen to them, amplify their voices, amplify their ideas, make it much bigger, much more impactful, and help them to succeed? So these are elements, I think, which I see as changing in terms of preference from the current generation, and I think it will continue to evolve. And companies have to create both infrastructure, policy, as well as soft culture to keep pace with this, right? And you have to also train and retain your managers, leaders who are managing this, workforce, to be able to cater to that need. And my final point is that within that, there are different people who have different needs based on their life cycle, the life stage where they are in. There are working moms. There are people who want to rejoin workforce. They had a break. There are people who have a caregiving responsibility in the family. Are you creating policy and are you making okay for them to take a break at a point in time or during the day at a particular time and not join a meeting but still be able to contribute to the work by being available at a different time and still be able to collaborate? Those are, I think, the changing dynamics, and the companies have to keep pace with that. Also, how are we building relevant skills of tomorrow in our people in terms of learning and development? It's no more a case of, here is our calendar for the year, and you basically go to 3 colleges and you're done, right? That's not the personal development plan for the future. It's much more individualized, focused around what they need, what does their job need, and how they can feel that it's a skill that is relevant for today and tomorrow, right? So I think the past, may not be a great tool and template to replicate in this case, and we have to continue to learn and evolve as a learning organizations, which I think companies are doing. Like Eugene was saying on the area of diversity, if we possibly do an audit, is any company there really, at the, whatever vision or goal they have achieved? I think may not be, but what is important is having a goal and continuing to pursue that, right? And are we doing enough? I don't think so. We can do much more. And that healthy dissatisfaction that Eugene was talking is extremely important if we want to keep moving the needle, keep moving that agenda of diversity and inclusion. And it is from different angles. There's no more a particular lens of looking at diversity. It is ethnicity within the same country. For example, I grew up in India and I'm out of India for last 10 years, and sometimes I don't fit into that society, right? I get challenges, and within India there are multiple states. The people speak different languages, they have preference for food, and I have lived across India, and I cannot stereotype a particular city or a particular part of India in a certain way. Everybody within that city can be different, and their preference can be different. So I think, again, I will go back to the inclusion. If we are focused on inclusion, diversity will automatically, I think, be amplified. Yeah, Vagnita, does it answer your question? Sorry for a long.
It does. In fact, I've got a lot of other interesting thoughts, and I wanted to pose this to the
And
speakers now.
yeah, and my one final thought is, I think one of the things that Reckitt globally has done, and our CEO has been very actively participating himself personally, is a conversation with employees called a Stronger Together Conversation Series, right? Where basically we don't do anything. There's no presentation in that forum. It's a 45-minute to an hour session where employees from around the world come and share their personal stories. Stories of when they felt greatly included, greatly enabled, stories when they did not feel included, and what was the impact of that on them and people around them, right? And that, I think, is really shaping and changing the way people think about some of these issues, right? Versus making a big chunk of presentations and that gathers dust. I think having these conversations and refreshing people's thoughts is extremely important. The dialogue is really, really important. And I'm glad many companies have actually started that.
So, I was a little curious, and I do know that you kind of have spent years in different countries in the Southeast Asia and Asia Pacific region, South Korea, Malaysia, India, Singapore. So, Surya, is there any difference that you've seen in terms of geography that the focus towards diversity and inclusion? Is it different in different places, or is it uniform? How
I
does it?
think I think there are layers to it, right? So I think if you ask the question, who does not want to be respected at work? Answer is irrespective of culture that you come from. Everybody wants to be respected. Who does not want to be valued? Who does not want to contribute, right? So I think that the needs of people are not necessarily different based on the country they come from or the geography they come from, right? Or the ethnicity they come from. The manifestation of it, the expression of it can be different based on your national culture, right? Based on, for example, if you are in a culture where, hierarchy is important, people will say the same thing in a certain way, right? And express themselves very differently. If you are culturally sensitive and adept at it, you will pick that nuance and turn that into an insight and an action. So my experience has been that I think the needs and the aspirations of people is fairly similar. How it gets expressed is different, and how we process that and how we listen to that can be a bit nuanced. I don't know if that answers your question, right? Based on the national culture or the culture that you're operating in.
That's very insightful, Surya. And I actually picked a few cues, and I believe that Nina and Eugene might be able to throw some light on these matters. So Surya extensively spoke about, how flexibility, technology, adaptability has become so important. Now, for those organizations wherein, majority of workforce is like a Gen Z or a millennial who are very tech savvy, it is a very easy process. That transition doesn't come very difficult for those organizations. However, in organizations wherein the skew is more towards the millennials and the Gen X's, it might be a little challenging, and being a little more inclusive and understanding becomes more critical. Are there any issues that Nina, you and Eugene, you both of you have seen or observed in the organizations that you've worked for? And any thoughts on how this challenge can be handled? Nina, would you want to go first?
Sure. Thank you, Agnita. Sure. And when you ask this question, it circles back to some of the things that Surya was talking about. So when you talk about challenges, I think it's not just about BD, but overall in any organization, we would see these challenges because that's the landscape you're talking about, right? The generation. So I think some of the key things that we see with millennials would be, the development opportunities and upskilling. Surya was talking about, the training and academics and all of that. So they see it as a challenge. How far can they progress? Can they upskill themselves? Surya was also talking about flexibility. I think with millennials, it's about having that autonomy. I think, to be honest, while I'm talking about these issues, I personally feel that today we are in an Asian world where the lines have become a little blurry between these generations. As compared to the previous times. And I'm pretty happy about it, how things have changed, because today I think generations understand that, we are interdependent, codependent on each other for us to thrive. There is a certain generation that brings in experience. There is a certain generation that brings in that agility and that, excitement to get things done. So, when it comes to millennials, they also look for a lot of autonomy and flexibility. Because that's the kind of market changes that we are seeing and things are moving towards. Also, one of the key challenges, I think it's not just millennials, everybody comes across of late, has been coming across, is health concerns, be it mental, be it societal, be it emotional, be it physical. So if I was to talk about BD, aside from a lot of things that we've looked into for employees and some of the things that, Eugene, Surya and Roshni were talking about, when it comes to, development of BD associates and upskilling, we have manager development programs, associate development programs, but we also look into mentorship programs. So I am part of Women Initiative Network here in Asia Pacific, and we started mentorship program for that circle. And then we extended it to everybody, irrespective of male, female employees. And for us, that mentorship program was not meant to talk about just career progression or, where you want to go next. It was a safe space for people to be with mentors and talk about any kind of topics that they had liked to, put forward and have a conversation about. Uh, Another thing that I really like, and I'm part of this particular segment, is what we call it BD, the Power Skill Series. So we talk about softer skills, right? So we call it power skills because we've come to a world where it's become very important for us to have these skills. And we try and equip everybody. And in fact, for this, what we also do is, aside from rolling out these sessions, we invite people to be leader teachers. We don't say that, the university is there and there are going to be a set number of people who are going to roll it out. We ask people within the region, be it leaders or associates or people managers, would you want to be a facilitator? So when we equip people on topics around emotional intelligence, how to influence across without having that authority or that title, with COVID times, how do you maximize your impact when you're virtually networking with your colleagues, because we feel that there is a distance. When it comes to, things around, well-being, last year we rolled out the wellness program. And, of course, when you talk about wellness, you touch on mental wellness, you touch on physical wellness, but we took it a little step forward and we also included financial well-being, where people were coached on how do they make investments, how do they save money, how do they budget things. We also took it forward to spiritual well-being and also parenting coaching sessions, where parents came together and they spoke about the challenges. And it was a great session that we were all part of. And lastly, I would want to touch upon the autonomy and flexibility. So with BD, in fact, when I joined BD, in my conversation with my boss, the topic came up about work from home. I didn't initiate it because uh, you know, different organizations have different structures. She initiated and she said, we have this culture and you can work from home once a week or twice a week, depending on, how we are placed for the meetings. And so for us, it was not something that at BD we had because of COVID. We were doing that, understanding the fact that, as long as people are accountable for what they're supposed to deliver, and people are happy with how they're equipped and they have the necessary resources, they don't really have to come to the office to show their face. If it's something where you have to be there in the office because the meeting requires you to be, you do. But otherwise, so personally, I have not been to office after last March. Since March 2020, I've just been once for International Women's Day, and nobody expects me to go to work as long as the deliverables are met and work can be done being at home. I don't know if I was able to clearly articulate and answer what you asked for, but I wanted to touch upon not just the concerns that we see largely across this generation, but also some of the things that we felt that we should be doing before we see it as a problem.
No, I think a few of the points that you just mentioned, Nina, they were like bang on. And, a lot of organizations, of course, are working towards it. But a few of these initiatives taken by BD are really helpful. I want to bring in Eugene as well on this because I know by virtue of his experience, he would be able to throw some light. Eugene, what do you feel? I mean, do you think that managing workplace, which is high on millennials and Gen Xs, can be a challenge for an organization, and how do you overcome it?
Okay, thanks. I think my esteemed colleagues have given a lot of sort of insights, right, to how you sort of bridge some of those gaps, some of the interventions. I think perhaps I would just give the perspective of perhaps instead of looking at differences, right, let's look at similarities. And I say this because way back in the late 90s, some of you guys will know that in Singapore we have to serve national service, right? So, I had to go through the military, and believe it or not, they sent me to the US for 1 year. So I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky. For those of you who know that's Midwest, and I basically attended the Armor Officers Advanced Program. So it was basically a program for US officers. There were about 15 foreign students in that course, about 150 of us. So there were a couple of Marines. So in those years that I was there, this was after Gulf I and Gulf II, right, the war. So my view of the US then was just, unfortunately, Family Guy or Seinfeld or whatever is, So I had no view of what America was, right, just from the TV. So when I went to the US, what struck me was, even though we were so different, we were so much the same. And it's exactly what Surya and Nina was saying, right? Fundamental values like respect, right? Fundamental values like integrity. So I would suggest that, I suppose they, depending on the profile of our organizations, if it's highly mixed, right? I think today they say there are 5 generations already, right, that coexist in companies. But if that indeed is the case, I'm not sure how, like the compensation guys will go crazy, right? Looking at benefits that make sense across. But I think if we focus on similarities, right, that's going to make a difference. So what do I mean by that, right? I think last year, some of you would have seen excerpts of the speech made by the Marriott CEO. And very unfortunately, he's passed away. In fact, just this year in February. But for those of you who saw and read his transcript, because he was going to downsize Marriott across the world, I looked at that CEO and I said, "Hey, have you got a job in Marriott?" No, I'm half kidding. But it was inspiring. And what came across to me was, and I want to bet that even though you're a millennial, you're a Gen Z or whatever you are, you could sit down and say, "Hey, look, this dude is cool, man. I can relate to everything that he's saying." So what struck me was basically having organizations, which some of you mentioned about purpose. And he struck a chord immediately, right, about Marriott, how it all started, the whole history. He talked about the values in the organization. He talked about the connections in the organization. And I thought those 3 points just struck me and reminded me of my days in the US, right? Well, I was so different, and yet it was so much the same. When we talk about family when I was in the US, hey, same things, right? When you talk about kids, it's the same challenges we face, and so I just want to say that perhaps companies should look at, what really draws us together as one, right, across generations, and maybe look at that. Sometimes in HR we get asked this question: hey, HR, should I focus on the strength or the weakness? So should I? So it's this age-old question, and I think that if we look more and more at commonality of values, right, of things that will hold companies together, I think that will make D&I sort of tick. Yeah, that's just my perspective. Yeah.
Focusing on the commonalities.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take.
Yeah.
So this is kind of bringing us, to the summation of this discussion. But I don't want to leave you guys without, I know, your views on, individually, what is it that you all think about how, or whatever we're going through in terms of pandemic, in terms of this new generation, the Gen Zs ready and hungry to get into the workspaces. What is your view of the future of workplaces? How will they transform, and how should organizations transform to accommodate the newer generations who are coming into the workplace? Would you want to start with it, Roshni?
Yeah, Magmita. So I think some parts have already been spoken by Nina, by Surya, by Eugene, that the newer workforce is going to believe in flexibility, which I think in most of our organizations, while it existed, it has become a norm now, right? So as we are adapting to it, greater trust, and if you are an organization which believes in a culture of accountability and responsibility, empowerment, trust, I think you are here to thrive, because that will be more required, in the sense that you are going to more and more deal with an virtual workforce, right? You're not going to be in closed office spaces and monitoring the work, which I think in most of the organizations of the co-panelists, what we heard doesn't even exist. So I think a lot of these mature, developed organizations who have already identified the need long ago have anyways built or established their organization culture around it. So in a way, we were also not really in a space where we were taken aback by the changes that COVID demanded in the workforce ways of working, right? So the flexibility or the trust or the fact that what matters is the work output and not the number of hours that you clock in, and when do you log in, when do you log out, never mattered in our organizations, is something that is really helped us deal with the current situation and is definitely here to stay. Apart from that, I think what again has been spoken of is a sharp focus on the skill building and the opportunity or the empowerment to define their career journeys, along with them being able to manage their personal life priorities. So more and more, I think even something like a sabbatical has picked up a lot over the last few years as compared to uh, uh, few years ago, which we saw it as a practice, because more and more employees of this age have conscious that they also have only one life. So they don't want to only have professional priorities and, like Surya mentioned, climb the ladder. They want to be this whole human being who is having or being able to meet both personal as well as professional aspirations. So as an organization, we need to be able to manage both and facilitate both.
I agree with you, Roshni. I think, a lot of emphasis on skills and flexibility at workplace has come in, and it will only increase. Organizations will have to keep evolving to match the needs
Right.
and the way the whole overall situation transforms. Surya, would you want to share your thoughts on this, please?
So I think most of it is, I think, well covered by Roshni and the other colleagues. I would just say anywhere, anytime, borderless, right? Flexibility, autonomy, trust, right? And some of the management gurus are also predicting a future, and this is not for any company, right? I'm generally speaking, right? Some of the articles that I read is that if we are heading towards a future where CEOs may not be selected by the board, if they may get into an election, and people will choose who they want to work for, right? And if that were to be applied, and I know some companies have made a move towards that, managers and leaders will have to really think, of how do they engage people, right? And listening, for example, will become very important in a world where short-term performance and patience can be a challenge, right? Because you're sometimes managing conversations, managing outcomes, and that does not allow you the space to coach and create that trust. So authenticity, I think, will be a very, very important leadership skill, which will be at a very high premium going forward.
Very critical takeaways, Surya, from what you just said: authentic leadership, and giving the autonomy to people, the employees, to select who they want the leader to be. So I want to move to Nina and then Eugene. Your thoughts on this, please.
So I think, a lot has been shared by Surya, Roshni, and Eugene. So I would just say that uh, when we talk about diversity, we have to start from the top also. So we need to have representation on the table amongst the leaders when we talk about diversity. And when we talk about newer generations, future generations, if you can't have that representation in the top leadership, of course, because of their age and experience, you may want to have them as ground level champions, because you cannot talk about diversity and inclusion and practices without having people to run it, without having people to advocate it. Another thing that I would say is, we spoke about authentic leadership, something called servant leadership that we follow at PD. So empathetic leadership, where, you are there to serve them, as Surya was saying, that, talking about elections where people are going to choose the CEO. So from that point of view, you're there to serve the people, you're there to support the people. If you look at it from that point of view, that's going to make a lot of difference. And I think what's going to make a lot of difference is also, if you're not fixed about quotas and numbers, when Eugene was talking about Singapore and, how we have these metrics is what helps us to, be diverse. But at the same time, we should not be controlled by metrics. So if it is very important for us so that, we can get to where we want to, but that shouldn't limit us from bringing in more people who want to be part of the diverse culture. So it shouldn't be quota driven versus, when we talk about inclusivity, it should be because, there is that emotional element of investment that organizations have to do that, because they understand that that is what will help them to be successful in the future. That is what I feel. And I think lastly, like what we are doing here, if you're doing that, share with organizations or make it public to a certain degree so that more and more organizations can adapt to it. Because I think a lot of times we also get blinded by what we are doing. We do not know where else to go, what else to do. There are too many articles and stuff that you'll find on Google. But when you speak with peers and colleagues and you understand their best practices, it's easier for you to implement it and understand, how you can navigate through the challenges and the successes. So that would be my take. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nina. And summing thoughts from Eugene.
Yeah, so wow, I think I could have said ditto to everybody who said this, but it's as trying to predict and look ahead. I mean, if I told you 10 years back that this little company called Samsung will take on Apple, all of you will probably laugh at me, right? So it's kind of hard to sort of look ahead. But there are certain certainties that I think for us to, I would just say, consider. And I always have these few things that always float in my mind. And one topic is exactly what we're talking about today, right? On generations and demographics, right? because that's really going to shift how the world is. I think it's India now 1.3 something, 1.4 billion, I'm not sure, right? But and if you look at that, and I just saw the news today about Japan, right? The lowest birth rate ever. Singapore is not far behind at 1.1, 1.2. So I think the world demographics is going to be a huge piece, right? And how you see the shift of geographies and of people, because that will have big implications of HR, I think. And obviously, you know, this links to this topic on the aging population and so on and so forth. So, you know, those things will obviously have big ramifications on us in HR, right? I'm not sure, man, about you, Surya, but I don't think I want to retire at, you know, well, maybe you are, but, you know, so I think people will really start to recontemplate. I mean, Singapore is pushing the boundaries of retirement age and so on. So I think demographic is going to be a huge play, right, on how the world sort of, you know, I often talk to my colleagues in Japan, right? And I ask them, hey, aren't you afraid that at some point your race is going to be wiped out, right? Because, you know, you're just not producing quick enough. We may not see this in this generation, but it'll be kind of sad, right? If we lose that culture, because it's kind of unique, right? But anyway, I think that's always a big play, right? I think the second big play that we should just look out for is technology. I think we all know that. You know, I often tell my own HR team that, hey, look, somebody out there is building some application that's going to make you and I obsolete. I mean, today already, right? You look at some of the AI tools that's used for recruitment. I know he's kind of like smile at it cynically, but it's a matter of time, right? Some of these jobs, you don't really need a HR guy, right, to be honest. You know, over the years, I've worked with different HR business leaders. The last one I worked for at Kimberly Clark was interesting. He was an ex-McKinsey partner. Working with him was pretty exciting because obviously, I just give you an example. Writing to him on email is like WhatsApping him, right? Because his average turnaround is about 2 minutes. Whether it's on a Saturday, on a Sunday, on a week, it was really difficult working with him. But what was interesting was that he could run a 9-box talent discussion, right? I would say better than me or as good as me, right? He could have insights. So I kind of like, okay, so what's really so, and this is just another human being, right? So imagine with AI and technology, I think that's a place to really think about for us in HR, right? I mean, how difficult is a 9-box? How difficult is calibration? Anyway, so I think the whole AI piece is one not to sort of, you know, put down, right? I think that's going to be huge. I mean, the other elements, well, I guess climate change may be different, but I think the last piece I would just say is changing social norms and values. I suppose years ago, you know, Singapore is still, obviously it's still illegal, right? Certain things are under the GLBT space in Singapore, but and the government's pretty open by saying not now, right? But I think these norms will start shifting, right, more and more. I remember 10 years back looking at, you know, things, and if I told my parents what's happening 10 years later, they'll probably flip over a few times, right? But that's going to happen, right? And again, I think that's something to look out for because it will sort of have implications on us. So yeah, those are my thoughts just to wrap up, consider. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Eugene. I believe this was a very interesting conversation. We actually were live on Facebook, and there were quite a few people who had registered who couldn't join for some technical issue. But we have received a lot of questions, and we have very less time. So I would want to just quickly jump over to the questions. And it's there in the chat. So please feel free to let me know if you want to express your opinion on any of those questions. I believe there is one question which has already been answered in some way or the other. So do you tweak the policies and culture as per millennial style of working? How do you find the alignment? So I believe in the discussion, to some extent, Eugene and both Nina have addressed those issues. I'm coming to the next question, which is by Mr. Muru. In the recent scenario of having to balance the organization's need for talents with digital transformation capabilities, as versus availability of experienced candidates, how open are your organizations to outsourcing these roles or interim roles? So probably the question is more on the lines that should organizations consider outsourcing these roles instead of bringing out that transformation internally? Any one of you would like to take up this question?
Let me try to provide response and then request my co-panelists to answer. I have a very simple framework for it. So if any work is core to our proprietary knowledge, right, which is very confidential, for example, R&D, for example, something that is core to our product or brand, right, which if lost can lead to competitive advantage loss, I think, and if it is cheaper to have it in-house, we will never outsource, right? That's the 2x2 matrix, right? Sometimes even if it is cheaper to outsource, but if it is core to our proprietary knowledge and technology and science, we will never outsource that because you need to, have that in-house. But the work which is not really proprietary, and if somebody can do it better than us and can do it at a lower cost, why not? And I think Uberization of workforce and skills will happen more and more. And different types of work can be organized more competitively at a cheaper rate, much better by use of technology by different groups. And you will see more and more of that trend in future. So it really depends on that. I don't know. I would welcome suggestions or any other thoughts on this from the co-panelists as well.
So Meena, Eugene, Roshni, do you have any thoughts on this question? Okay, so I think we'll move to the next one. So we have one from Neha Dugar. I'd love to know more about how other industry leaders are making it part of their culture rather than simply showing numbers. So we were talking about, matrices putting in place and all of that. I, to some extent, believe that, what BD is doing in terms of authentic and servant leadership is an answer. However, I want to keep this question open for response. So any of the speakers would want to take it?
I think I'll just go back, Vagnita, on the point of having dialogue and conversation. That's, a cultural important ritual or symbol that you can keep in the organization, and signal what is important and what is not.
Okay. Yes, Roshni, you had something.
Yeah, so Vagmita, I think what Nina had started with, that inclusion precedes diversity, right? So to keep it simple, industry leaders or leadership commitment should reflect in the actions that one takes, and not only in driving the numbers, right? So be it through, say, if you say that you are an organization which believes in openness, then you should have practices, for example, open leadership town halls, conversations where employees are free to speak their mind. They are able to ask the questions on their minds, get answers right from the topmost leadership. Do you have the policies and benefits that are inclusive? So, for example, if you see you are an organization which is pro LGBTQ plus inclusion, then do you at least have the same-sex partner benefits as part of your Mediclaim insurance? Do you look at gender-neutral infrastructure? So these are, I'm saying, very basic things which go a long way in communicating that, yes, you're not only looking at numbers, you truly believe in inclusion. Do you invest in reasonable accommodations which enable different diversity strands to get a sense of equality, so an equal chance of winning for different diverse members who would have had different starting points because of different personal characteristics, be it persons with disability, be it members from the transgender community. So do you actually walk the talk? Do you have the right enablers in place, and are you very open about it in your culture, that this is what we have, this is how we are going to enable you? Is something which goes a long way, apart from showing it only in a dashboard.
Can I just add to it?
Yes.
I agree 100% that we need to bring in policies and leadership should walk the talk. But I think it's also very important to, again, going back to that inclusive piece, to have these conversations on ground level and let people have these conversations amongst themselves. So when we look at metrics, we look at it as a tool to have those conversations. So every month when we look at the report, we look at some hiring managers who may not have done the survey or what they've written. There have been times when we've noted that the hiring manager has said, do not come back for feedback. And you really want to know why somebody would say that, right? And at the same time, We also get feedback from the teams where we realize that, there has been a little bit of bias, some conversations, and you want to use those inputs or those numbers to have those conversations to drive the change. So because the policies and the benefits, when they come into play, it's great. We all want benefits, don't we? We all love it. But if people are just getting benefits and they are not really living the culture that you want to drive, because of which you brought those benefits into play, the whole purpose of those policies gets defeated. So where we see, these metrics is a way of having those conversations and not just putting it on a PowerPoint and saying in a monthly review or quarterly review that, yes, we've achieved our SLA.
No,
Yeah.
that's a great explanation, Nina.
Just one additional thought I wanted to offer, Vagmita, as a practice that we do, for example, is we look at many of the in-process measures as a diagnostic. Not, for example, if it's women is our focus, right, in terms of representation at different levels. What we also do is when the performance cycle is over, we check that by band to see are they fairly being rated as top and bottom, right? Same thing on talent rating. Same for salary proposals that happen through the year,
Yes.
right? And you will see if you do these diagnostics, for example, you will see in retention, in separations that happen, right? You will see if there is a conscious bias or not, and then that gives you a very good data entry and to have the conversations with your leadership team as well as with the organization on what's happening here. And if it is not, then also gives you the confidence that culturally you are actually making progress. And then that also is a great way to celebrate, right? So I do think the diagnostics are important part of this. And I think every organization should use that more and more.
So, to sum up the sentiment from all of you that I've got is that, diagnostics and data collection is important and critical to be able to walk the talk. So you won't be able to depict it in any other fashion if you are not doing the diagnostics right. There are a lot of questions. There's one interesting one that I've come across, and I just want to ask that. What do you think is the major problem for organizations to embrace diversity and inclusion? So, yes, there are few organizations which are going through a phase that they have not adopted it completely. Anyone wants to take a response to this question?
I can do that. Having worked with different organizations and organizations of bigger, larger scale, I think the answer is very simple. We all are resistant to change. We all like to be in the same setup. We all like to be, perfect example is COVID. When COVID happened, people didn't know what to do. People were worried about working from home. People, I know personally people who would say, I have to go to work every day. And then when COVID happened, they couldn't go to work, but the work was getting done from home. And how is that possible? So it's that resistance to change that we have as human beings. I think that's what seeps down to everything. And this is something that I've always felt. And I always say that, if we start living our workspace and our professional life, like how we live our personal life, where we are willing to adapt and adopt, things would become much easier. Because, we do make some accommodations and concessions in our personal lives. But when it comes to work, we get a little rigid. So if we were to make those little concessions, I think organizations would become more flexible. That's my take.
Do you also think one of the big reasons is that probably the actual benefits of investing in, because it is a behavior and a cultural change that you are introducing in the organization, and it takes a lot of resources, including money, people, management. So, do you think that could be a deterrent that people are not willing to invest as many resources because they do not see the returns?
I think, well, I think today, I would say most leaders will embrace, for anything else, right? Politically, that's always the right thing to say. But I think most leaders today, I would dare say, yeah, they probably, they would embrace that. They would know how important that is to have diverse views and all that. I'd say maybe one of the practical things really is the challenges that's really facing the business. I mean, if I had to list down the top 5 business challenges today, I'm not sure if diversity would be the first, to be honest. right? It could be from growth to profitability, and obviously D&I is going to be enabling this. And that's why I think the role of HR and our leadership roles in ensuring this continues to be on the agenda is important, because it's very easy to sort of lose that. I still remember way back presenting a diversity plan to one of my business leaders, and the first question he asked me, which I was pretty taken aback, was, "So what are we really trying to solve here?" And that was that was a tricky one, because you're right. There are resources that's going to be required. I mean, you got to put in time. You've got to make sure that your engine is sort of in place. You got to get. I hate using the word councils, but you got to get stuff going. And when you start these things, it's no turning back, right? You got to get the engine rolling. So he asked me that. What are you really trying to solve? I wouldn't tell you the rest of the conversation, but sometimes I'd say the practical answer is, given the business challenges.
Actually.
Yeah, it may not be top of mind, right? Because I mean, I think many organizations are struggling to sort of keep afloat, even before COVID, right? There's market challenges. So yeah, it's how we put that business case across. I think that would be an interesting one, right? How HR leaders actually put the business case across on diversity, I suppose. Yeah.
There's one more interesting question. It's kind of Pooja Prakash, she's posed this question. I've hired the recent pass outs from journalism schools and have been baffled by their outlook on jobs, professional behavior, and lack of responsibility on many occasions. Is there something we can do to change these traits in the trainings? Who would want to take this?
I think if this is indeed true, Vagmita, maybe a step needed before training is to go back and address something in the hiring process, right? Uh, and is there a fit in and I'm not blaming the candidates here, so that everybody doesn't get me wrong. What I'm trying to say is there is some sort of fit issue between what they're looking for and what these jobs are offering, and perhaps then there is a lack of motivation. I am assuming that their skills and leadership is in place, and that is not questionable, right? So some sort of hiring, issue going on is my assessment. And then no matter how hard you try on the training, it will be very difficult to move unless there is a motivation issue which can be, tackled.
There is a similar related, no, so we're talking about hiring here. Now we have a question which is related to retention. So we have a question from Sarita. Does diversity and inclusion have a real impact on retention of employees? If yes, how? I have a feeling that quite a few would want to take this one.
I think, yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
these are questions that I feel like, we should not even have in our minds, right? It's like, somebody asking me to go on a panel discussion where there's a debate on whether HR adds value to business, right? I feel it's in the similar, similar. And I in the past, I have refused to participate in such forums. Things like, does training add value, for example, right? So these are questions like that, and I would rather not answer these questions because these are self-explanatory. And I think the more diverse you have, more diversity you have in your organization, I think you will be better off attracting, retaining, engaging, developing better talent. There is no question about it.
I also think that this sustainability and diversity and inclusion have started playing a lot of role in building an employer brand.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes.
I mean, how do we choose employers? We talk to our family, friends, seniors, figure out what the best companies are, what do they offer, and we get excited about them. And then this word of mouth plays a huge role in the brand promise, right? And these are experience led. These are not because some company is publishing something on LinkedIn, you will start believing it. You would talk to somebody who has worked in a company, and if that evidence comes alive to you, then you get excited about that company and you feel you will fit in that company, then you go and work. And then perhaps if your experience, which is your second moment of truth after buying the brand, is really good, you stay longer and you stay committed. So I don't know, I was possibly a little bit provocative here because the question is in a different angle, but I don't know. Welcome to suggestions from the other co-panelists.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that, you know, in its purest form, D&I, I would say, look, in its purest form, anybody, and I always say this, right, about retention and attraction, when I get my HR team asking me about employer value proposition and blah, 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 I always say, hey guys, you got to start from home, right? If you can't get your house in order, if your own people cannot, hey, let's not do all these funky stuff about, you know, trying to get out there and all, because the truth be told, right, it's what happens back home. So D&I in its purest form, I'll tell you this, it exudes all this stuff that we talked about, right? Respect, embracement, you know, literally embracing differences, valuing differences, not only tolerating, it's embracing and valuing it. And all this will say a lot about your company. And these things come a long way, right? When it comes to attraction and retention. Yeah.
Valid thought, Eugene. I think we have kind of hit the limit to this webinar. I mean, the time limit. However, there's just one question. It stands out, so I'm just posing that one. That will be our last question for this session. This is from Purnima Suresh. What are some of the best practices, especially for young startups? So we haven't really, categorically discussed about startups in the conversation, but I would just be curious to know your thoughts on this.
I don't mind pitching in because I've worked with startups. I think the structure of startup, or the true nature of startup, is something that can get out of control because they are highly agile, right? And that's a benefit, and that's a blessing, and that's a curse. So I think from an HR point of view or organization point of view, it's very important that you first outline clearly how you want the culture to be, what you want the values to be. Even before you hire people, you want to first lay down fundamental few values. It's again going back to what Eugene was saying and what I said a while ago, how we are at home. Before your kids are born, you have certain values, right? And those are basic fundamental values. Similar to that, in an organization, especially which is a startup organization, you need to put together some processes, some policies, being mindful of the fact that startups are highly agile. People who come in come with a lot of sense of achievement and sense of purpose, because they want to make a difference, they want to drive changes, they want to shine, right? That's the startup way of, and it's also a perfect place to leverage on the agility that people bring in, because they're very quick to adapt and adopt to things, and also they come up with great ideas. So one of the experiences that I have is an organization that I joined and I worked with. We after the initial chaos and everything, we reached out to people and we said, we gave them a vision board and we said, what do you want to see in the organization? What do you see as culture? Because we did not want that, leaders should talk about, this is how I want to drive the organization, because then we are not talking about diversity. Let's see what the leaders have as viewpoints, and let's see what everyone else in the organization thinks. And then we looked at a lot of similarities. And from there, we drew conclusions around, what the culture of the organization should be. And then, it makes it easy for you to hire talent. So what Surya was talking about, the hiring concern. So, when you're hiring, you look for culture fit aside from the skills, because will issues you can never train, skill issues you can still work on. So these are the things I would say that, when it comes to startups, they're highly agile. They have a lot of energy and excitement to make a difference. You leverage on that, but you also put some, I don't want to use the word limitations or restrictions, but you put some measures in place so that it doesn't go out of hands, because it can. It could be really explosive when it comes to startups.
I'm sure this response would have been really valuable for Purnima. So I think we've kind of reached the end of the discussion. I am still hungry for more conversations, and I might just buzz you after this webinar to have a more detailed conversation around this. But nonetheless, thank you so much for spending time with us, being here, and sharing your thoughts, your ideas. Thank you so much. And this was a wonderful session, interesting takeaways, and we hope that we catch up again soon for more meaningful and interesting discussions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
It
was a pleasure.
Thank
Thank
you
you for
so
the
much.
opportunity.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank you for the opportunity. Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.